Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to introduce our guest speaker today, Colonel Robert Darling. By the way, after his speech, he will exit because he has to catch a flight, not because he doesn't want to meet everyone, so I wanted you to know why he's zipping out when he's done. In October of 2007, Lieutenant Colonel Darling retired from the United States Marine Corps with just over 20 years of active duty service. Among other things, he flew attack helicopters in Desert Shield and Desert Storm and in Somalia, Africa, in support of Operation Restore Hope. In June of 1998, he was selected to fly as a presidential pilot with Marine Helicopter Squadron 1. In October of 2000, he was handpicked to work for the White House Military Office Airlift Operations Department, and it was in that capacity that Lieutenant Colonel Darling supported the President, the Vice President, and the National Security Advisor in the President's Emergency Operations Center on 9/11. Bob has addressed numerous academic, government, and military organizations, including Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government and the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He is the author of a book, 24 Hours Inside the President's Bunker, 9/11/01, the White House. For a very personal, human, humbling, yet uplifting story of the events of 9/11, please give a warm Rotary welcome to Colonel Robert Darling.
Wow, thank you all very much. I have to thank you, Jeff, and thank you for the Rotary Club to allow me to come to Tulsa to be a part of this event here today. I'm truly honored. I would like to just start off by telling you, Phil, that you just lifted me up. That was phenomenal. Really outstanding. Very nice. So as Jeff said in the introduction, I'm Lieutenant Colonel, retired United States Marine Corps. I want to tell you a little bit about me. I flew attack helicopters. Greatest job in the Marine Corps. 2 pilots, all the bullets we can carry. Everywhere we go, we get to blow stuff up, go back and get more bullets, go out and do it again. All of a sudden, in June of 1998, I was asked to put a presidential package in to be a presidential helicopter pilot, and I was selected by my peers in June of 1998 to fly President Bill Clinton around. Again, I was a little concerned. I thought that might be too boring for me. You really can't yank and bank and scare the president, but it turned out to be what an honor that was. I just want to tell you a little bit about President Clinton. When he came out of the White House and climbed up the steps of Marine One, he would come into the cockpit, he would look right at you, he shook your hand, and for a brief moment in time, you thought the president and you were actually buds. Hillary, not so much. And I don't tell you that to pick on Hillary, but she was steering young Chelsea by the shoulders, and she would come up the stairs. She made a hard right-hand turn back to her seat. She was in a terrible mood. We didn't take it personally. We assumed he made her that way, and it really had nothing to do with us. But what an honor it was to fly the President of the United States. And then I did that for a few years, and the squadron commanding officer asked me to be a part of the White House Military Office Airlift Operations in October of 2000. Again, suit and tie, no more flying, doing logistics, not sure how I was going to like that job. And it turned out you're working in the White House, you're in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, and you're supporting the presidential movements worldwide. What people don't realize, our president, the leader of the free world, he only rides in our helicopters, driven in our limousines, speaks on our phones, seen by the doctors that we provide, who approve the food for him to eat. Snipers, doctors, automobiles, phones, helicopters, worldwide. And because we can't outrun Air Force One, we have to move all that equipment in advance of Air Force One. So if our president is going to go to Japan, Korea, and then China, we'll put 500 people and all those assets in Alaska so Air Force One can safely refuel. I have another 500 people and all those assets waiting for him in Japan. I'll airlift Alaska, move it to Korea, take Japan, move it to China, take Korea, move it to Hawaii. We'll move DDGs, Navy guided missile destroyers, around the Pacific Ocean to make sure our president is kept in a missile bubble. Should anybody try to get too close to him, we can engage them well before they get there. That's the type of presidential package the leader of the free world, our president, gets worldwide. When President Putin comes to America, he's flown in our helicopters, he drives in our limousines, he's allowed to have his Secret Service detail, but everything else is provided by the United States. September 11, 2001, I was the airlift operations officer responsible for President Bush's logistics package. I was in the Eisenhower building. We were monitoring his daily schedule. The minute he was wheels up on Air Force One, or right around 1 o'clock, we were going to have the Air Force swoop into Sarasota, Florida, and then pick up all that presidential gear and bring it back to Andrews Air Force Base when obviously the world changed. Here's what I want you to know. Since 2010, when I got permission to tell you this story, I've been traveling around this great country of ours, meeting folks just like you. And I realized the greatness of America. Though we're a military superpower, the greatness of America resides right here in this room. The greatness of America is in its people, the people who are willing to come together, stand up, risk their lives to save the lives of another, is truly the strength of our resiliency in our country, and that is where we get to be the title, the greatest nation on earth. Sure, we're a military superpower, but our people are even stronger, and that's what I want you to get out of this presentation today. So let's get going. Let's dive in. So my first slide up here is really very important. I want you all to know there's only two people in the U.S. government who can give offensive, lethal instructions to the U.S. military. Anybody can defend themselves. But if we're going to cross a border, overthrow a government, kill a terrorist, it better come from the National Command Authority. The National Command Authority is made up of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. The President was in the Emma E. Booker Elementary School. The Secretary of Defense was in the Pentagon that day over at the National Military Command Center, essentially the war room over at the Pentagon. Our Vice President, Dr. Rice, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're all in support of the National Command Authority. Vice President Cheney was in the West Wing, as was Dr. Rice, who was our National Security Advisor. And I put two general officers up here because General Shelton, the United States Army, our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was in the process of turning over his post to General Richard Myers, United States Air Force. General Shelton was out of the country. General Myers was attending a congressional breakfast that day on Capitol Hill. We're in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, 4th floor, monitoring the President's schedule in Sarasota, Florida, when at 8:46 someone entered our office and said, "Sir, quick, turn on CNN." Apparently a small aircraft just struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. All the aviators in the office, we turned on the TV set, we looked at that first photo up there, and we made the comment, why would a pilot crash into a 110-story landmark on such a clear blue crystal day in the city of New York? He literally has the Hudson River to his left, the East River to his right, and most of us could glide and reach LaGuardia Airport. There must be much more to that story than we know. Well, the phone calls were starting to come in, trickle in at that moment, and we learned it was American Airlines Flight 11. It departed out of Boston Logan Airport, was supposed to arrive in California, Los Angeles, LAX. It went lost communication over Albany, New York, down the Hudson River at over 500 miles an hour, careening into the North Tower at 8:46. While the world watched, to include all of us in the Eisenhower building, we saw United Airlines Flight 175 come into view. I remember yelling up at the TV screen going, "Hey, what is this moron doing? Trying to get a look at the hole in the North Tower before he circles to land at LaGuardia Airport," and we watched it careen into the South Tower at what looked like full power to us. Just then, my boss, he's an Air Force, full-bird colonel. He came into the office, he told all the airlift operations officers, "Stop what you're doing. Eyeballs on me." We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding right before our eyes in the city of New York. Stand by for a lot of White House designated missions. What does that mean? Whenever we have a national tragedy in our country, Washington, D.C. is full of expertise and resources. Everybody wants to get to the tragedy site. They end up calling the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense will put them into a queue because no one government agency is more important than the next. But if you call the White House and you say, "Hey, boss, this is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I have 75 doctors and all the medicines I can carry. I really need to be on the ground up there in the city of New York." And the White House says go, We designate you a 1 Alpha 1 priority mission. We will push baby food out of the back of the next available Air Force heavy lift asset to get you and your people loaded up and where the White House or the President wants you to be. So now in airlift operations, our phones are ringing off the hook. All these government agencies that want to be up in the city of New York to help are requesting 1 Alpha 1 priority. We're pushing it up to the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, and he's going, approved, approved, approved. Now we're on the other phone talking to the Pentagon National Military Command Center, asking them to divert every heavy lift Air Force asset out of the sky, bring them into Andrews Air Force Base just east of Washington, D.C., get them on the ground, fill them full of fuel, rack them and stack them, park them where you need to. There's going to be a wave of people and resources coming across town. The White House wants everyone up there in the city of New York. The true heroes of the day, the heroes I had the pleasure of meeting last night, the first responders, the people we entrust our lives to every single day to protect our communities, were in New York City doing what they were trained to do. They were pushing everybody to the north away from ground zero. They were closing all bridges and tunnels going to and from Manhattan. They made 14 different entry-exit points, all one-way exit points, to get as many people off Manhattan Island as possible. They were vacating the people out of Tower 2 and Tower 1 as quickly as they could to save as many lives as possible. The true heroes of this story, the heroes that we know so well in our communities, were doing great things on 9/11. Here it is, 9:05. President Bush is in the Emma E. Booker Elementary School when Andy Card, the White House Chief of Staff, entered the classroom and whispered in President Bush's ear, "Mr. President, a second airliner has just struck the South Tower. America is under attack." Let's be the president just for a moment. He's from Texas. He's been president for 8 months. He's got a classroom of elementary school kids in front of him. Along the back wall of this classroom is a traveling White House press corps. He sees the horror on their faces. Their BlackBerries are going off. Their hands are over their face and mouth. And he has to make a decision. Do I get up and just run out of this classroom? Or do I stay and try to remain calm? Because I also know on the other side of that classroom wall is a traveling White House situation room. A situation room whose job it is to get information in to help build the president's situational awareness. Our chief executive's primary role is to make decisions. So he decided, I'm going to stay in this classroom. I'm going to let my military members and government employees do their job on the other side of that wall. They're going to gather some information. They're going to bring me courses of action. And when time is appropriate, I'll make some executive decisions. Until then, I'm going to stay right here. He made his final remarks at 9:30 in the classroom. Secret Service whisked him away, took him back to Sarasota, Florida, about as fast as they can drive. I'm allowed to tell you this. Times of national emergency, we always want the president airborne. We never want our president to be stuck in a bunker complex somewhere around our nation, unable to move, unable to be seen by the American public, unable to communicate. We want to get him high in Air Force One. With the capabilities of that airplane, he can talk to any world leader, he can execute any military operational plan, and he can certainly be seen by the American public. It's what we wanted to do on 9/11. It's what Secret Service primary mission was: get the president airborne, get him out of danger, put him high into the sky. He made his final remarks, and they were gone at 9:30. All of a sudden, we're working the 1 Alpha 1s in the Eisenhower building, getting everything diverted into Andrews Air Force Base, when all of a sudden an airliner overflew the White House. I will tell you, this airliner was so low and so loud, we all froze right there in our tracks. Somebody eventually ran to a window and goes, "Holy mackerel, sir, I just saw a big white jet, hard left-hand turn, heading west." We had breaking news, fire and explosion over at the Pentagon. Pentagon was just struck by American Airlines Flight 77. It departed 30 miles from the west of Washington, D.C. at a Dulles Airport, went as far as Ohio, hijacked right back to Washington, D.C. It made a right-hand 360 over Reagan National Airport before careening into the west side of the Pentagon at 9:37. The aircraft that violated presidential airspace was not American Airlines Flight 77. If you remember back on 9/11, the U.S. Air Force was conducting a huge national military command and control exercise. They moved one of our national level assets, an Air Force E-4B aircraft. It's a 747 with a strange dome on top. It's a command and control platform. It comes out of Offutt, Nebraska. They parked it at Andrews Air Force Base. When the second tower was struck, they activated that aircraft, that crew, that mission, real world, get to the President of the United States. When that 747 took off out of Andrews and they put a laser line in for Sarasota, Florida, it took them left out of Andrews and they ultimately flew right over the White House, racing to get near the President of the United States. That's what got Vice President Cheney picked up by the Secret Service by his elbows and raced and forced underground that day as a result of the violation of presidential airspace over the White House. But this Air Force E-4B and this hijacked 757 must have literally passed each other in flight as one was racing to the President and one was careening into the west side of the Pentagon that morning at 9:37. Just then in airlift operations, my boss came in again. He told me, stop what you're doing, eyeballs on me. We had a violation of presidential airspace. And all of a sudden, all these loudspeakers blared to life. Evacuate the White House. Evacuate the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. Everybody secure your classified information and go to the alternate site. That's it. The boss said, shut it down. I quickly grabbed him and said, sir, I can't leave. President Bush is not coming back to Washington, D.C. today. Wherever they take him, he needs limousines, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and phones. He needs the presidential package. He said, you can't do it from here. Go across the street, go underground, do logistics. The rest of us are out of here. We'll catch up with you later. So I grabbed the planning kit, and as I'm heading out of the Eisenhower building, looking over at the West Wing, I had to stop just for a second, just pause just for a second. The White House is probably the most secure piece of real estate in the world. And on 9/11, they had the gates to the north wide open, the gates to the south wide open. Every Secret Service had an automatic weapon, and they were yelling in bullhorns, ladies, take off your heels and run. There's another plane inbound. Seeing these professional young staffers, 20 and 30-year-olds, kicking off their shoes, dropping their purses and sweaters, sprinting off the most secure piece of real estate in the world was an unbelievable sight. Got across the street, I showed my credentials, Secret Service let me in. I'm underground. I'm standing before a door you and I don't pull on. I picked up the phone, I request permission to enter, and I walked into the President's Emergency Operations Center, the bunker under the White House. I can't tell you how deep it is, how thick the walls are, how to get there. I'm allowed to tell you it exists. It was built back in the 50s and 60s as a hardened facility where we could take the first family in times of national emergency before we can move them out of Washington, D.C. It's basically a Cold War relic. It's run by the White House Military Office. Most of the staffers upstairs in the White House didn't even know it existed until 9/11. It's just something that the White House Military Office mans and operates on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. So I'm entering. As soon as I walked into this bunker complex, carrying my logistics planning kit, the first person I saw that day was Vice President Cheney's military aide, good friend of mine. I said, Tom, I'm here to do logistics. I'll stay out of your way. He said, Bob, I need you to forget logistics. I need you to help me answer the phones. They're ringing off the hook. Try to imagine we're in a war room, an operations center, bunch of phones, computers, TV screens, military members doing their job, sitting in front of their consoles, scribbling, talking, doing what they're trained to do. And I can see on the far right-hand side there was an empty cubicle, an empty desk. As I got closer to it, I could hear the phone ringing. So naturally, I ran down there. I dropped my logistics planning kit. I sat down. I picked up the phone. This was my first phone call about 9:52 that morning, 7 minutes after the White House was evacuated, ordered evacuated, as I'm sitting there now working in the bunker complex called the PIOC. 9:52, when I answered the phone, Major Darling. The gentleman on the other end was in the upstairs West Wing Situation Room, now pushing information down into the bunker complex when he said to me, Major, we have another hijacked plane 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, inbound, Washington, D.C. Naturally, I said, you're going to have to hold on. I covered my receiver. I spun to my right. I yell out real loud, Mr. Vice President, Situation Room is reporting we have another hijacked plane 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, inbound, Washington, D.C. Vice President Cheney, his wife Lynn, Dr. Rice, her deputy Stephen Hadley, Norma Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, were all coming over to my console. They were forced underground as a result of the violation of P-56, the airspace over the White House, coming to hear this news that we have another hijacked plane coming at us. Vice President Cheney turned away from me. Up on the wall down there, there's 3 black speaker boxes. They're landlines. He can talk to any government official he needs to talk to. He gets patched through to the FAA Herndon, Virginia Command Center. The supervisor on duty, his name is Rick. He goes, Rick, it's the vice president. I was just told we have another hijacked plane somewhere south of Pittsburgh. Can you confirm that for me? He came back, said, sir, that aircraft is not talking. It's not squawking a transponder code, given air traffic control, airspeed, altitude, and direction. Mr. Vice President, that's a hijacked aircraft. He goes to the second speaker box. Hey, Don, are you up? He's looking for that other member of the National Command Authority who could give offensive, lethal instructions to the U.S. military. But for whatever reason, Donald Rumsfeld wasn't there. At 8:46, they entered his office to say, sir, we need you downstairs in the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon. He said, no, I'm sticking with my schedule. Keep me apprised of what's going on. 9:03, the second tower was struck. They re-entered his office, said, Mr. Secretary, we need you down in the National Military Command Center. He said, no, I'm due to have a CIA briefing. Keep me apprised of what's going on. At 9:37, when the Pentagon was struck by Flight 77, his office literally shook. He got up out of his chair and he ran outside to assist with the wounded from the impact of that airliner into the Pentagon. A pretty admirable thing to do, but not his appointed place of duty. I got the president trying to get airborne, the Secretary of Defense lost in the parking lot. No one knows where he's at. We have nobody at the helm to tell our military fighters what the rules of engagement are. And all of a sudden, Vice President Cheney, talking to this one-star general, goes, General, I want you to listen to me. I want 2 F-15s. I want them at Otis Air National Guard Base. Let me know when they're airborne. Stand by to shoot this aircraft down. I got to tell you, I instinctively covered the receiver. I took a step back from Vice President Cheney. I turned and I just stared at him for a second. My 14 years in the Marine Corps taught me our job is options for the president. We just unleashed the United States Air Force to take lethal action against a civilian airliner. And I realized I wasn't talking to an ordinary politician. This is a congressman from Wyoming, a chief of staff for President Ford, a Secretary of Defense for the first President Bush, now Vice President of the United States. He didn't say, get me fighters. He said, get me the F-15s that he knew we had on alert at Otis Air National Guard Base. And he knew we had F-16s in Langley, Virginia, F-18s in Jacksonville, Florida. We couldn't have had a better crisis leader at the helm that day, getting our military moving forward to start defending America. Next thing we know, we heard F-15s were airborne. They were supersonic, 1,200 miles per hour, closing in on United Flight 93. They were 5 minutes away. They wanted to be confirmed, weapons free to engage. Without hesitation, Vice President Cheney said, shoot that aircraft down. Just then, it was like the air was sucked out of the bunker complex. We got a real-world military operation in progress. Everybody, all eyes are on the Vice President. Nobody's making a sound. F-15s are weapons free to engage. All of a sudden, at 10:05, all the satellite radios down there blare to life. Aircraft down. Aircraft down. 68 miles south of Pittsburgh. No survivors. Vice President Cheney just staring up at those 3 speaker boxes, finally turned around. He walked right over to me and he goes, Major, for the congressional investigation, state your full name. And I was thinking, no. I don't know if now is a good time to tell you this, sir, but I'm here to do logistics. But I snapped out of it, put my heels together. Mr. Vice President, Major Darling. He goes from Major Darling to the Vice President to the National Military Command Center. We just shot that plane down. I really need to talk to the President. And everybody turned to Air Force One, Air Force One. This is the POC, trying to get President Bush on the net. Just then, those same satellite radios blared back to life. The F-15s never fired. The F-15s never fired. United Flight 93 was on the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania when they got there. 40 innocent, ordinary Americans took off out of Newark Airport, New Jersey, supposed to arrive in San Francisco, California, when they were hijacked. They were talking to loved ones. 3 planes, 3 targets. We're not going to Cuba. We unite or we die. And these ordinary Americans united themselves, came up with a plan, stormed the cockpit. We believe from the FAA tapes that they got hands on terrorists, and that plane ultimately rolled inverted and crashed straight down in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at over 500 miles an hour. When the FBI went to Shanksville to comb the wreckage site of Flight 93, they found the last piece of aircraft 40 feet in the dirt. That's how hard that plane hit the ground. They also found many indicators that the target of those terrorists was the dome on the U.S. Capitol. But these civilians, ordinary Americans, these heroes, strangers who came together to unite themselves, stopped these radical Islamists from reaching their target in Washington, D.C. for sure that day. True American heroes. Here it is, the president's on Air Force One. He's talking to the vice president in the bunker complex. That's the executive side of the bunker complex. We're literally in the operational side, behind that presidential seal where all the radios and other classified equipment is. You'll never see a picture from inside that room. You only see pictures from this executive side of the room. They immediately put two classified programs into effect. Continuity of presidency and continuity of government are now in effect. Obviously, I can't tell you the details of those programs, but I can tell you this much. Continuity of presidency, the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House can no longer be in the same geographical area. Because the vice president's in the White House, President Bush made a hard left-hand turn. They're heading west. We got to put some miles between the president and vice president. We also now have got to get the Speaker of the House, who's over on Capitol Hill, out of Washington, D.C. That became a high priority mission. You know who else we care about? The Senate pro temp, the leader of the Senate. But on 9/11, the Senate pro temp was Strom Thurmond. That man was 108 years old. We were not evacuating Strom Thurmond. They gave him a bowl of soup, told him the stock market was up. It was over. They put him back to bed. He's safe. It's done. But now we got to get the Speaker of the House out of Washington, D.C. These missions are in progress. Down there, you see that lower photo there. That's Karen Hughes. She came with President Bush from Texas. There's a White House communicator next to Dr. Rice. There's David Addington, the attorney for Vice President Cheney. And there's Mary Madeline dressed in blue. You may know her. She's married to that crazy guy, James Carville, we see on MSNBC once in a while. She was an assistant to Vice President Cheney. Just then it gets real fast. We just got past the night of Flight 93 when I heard everybody yelling in the bunker. Everybody was staring at the TV sets up there. Apparently CNN was reporting that the South Tower of the World Trade Center had just collapsed. I'll never forget this moment because what people were seeing and what they were told was not something they were ready to emotionally comprehend. They were literally yelling back at the vice president going, "Sir, that's not true. Maybe we lost the first 20 floors. Maybe the antenna broke off. Maybe. Vice President Cheney told everybody, stop. Does anyone know how many people work there? Literally, someone yelled out, "Sir, there are 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex. There's 50,000 people in those 2 buildings alone." He said, "Get me the president." He flipped over a sheet of paper, and he started to scribble some rough order of math. President Bush came up on the net, and he goes, "Mr. President, I was just told, sir, that we lost the South Tower in New York City. It's my best guess that we have at least 20,000 dead Americans in the city of New York." Mr. President, I was just told, just informed a second ago, that a portion of the Pentagon has just collapsed again. It's my best guess we have 800 to 1,000 dead over at the Pentagon. Just then, he turned his back to us, had a private conversation with the president, and hung up the phone. At that very moment, Secret Service called me down the bunker complex. I picked up the phone. Secret Service agents have sensors to protect the White House, to make sure that nobody tries to parachute onto the White House in the middle of the night. Their capabilities far exceed that of the FAA. They picked up a high-speed, low-level aircraft 8 miles out, low and fast, heading towards the White House. Naturally, I turned. I said, "Mr. Vice President, sir, Secret Service is reporting a bogey aircraft, an unidentified aircraft, 8 miles out, low and fast, heading for the White House." He turned, speaker boxes, looking for Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld is now back in the building. He goes, "Don, we got a bogey aircraft 7 miles out, low and fast. Do we have an asset over Washington, D.C. that can engage this guy? Do I have an F-15, an F-16, an F-18, anything I can use to intercept this low-level, unidentified aircraft?" In the meantime, Secret Service and I are going 6, 5, 4. He goes, Don, I'll authorize an over-the-horizon shot. No visual confirmation required. If you got a radar-guided missile over Baltimore, shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him. Mr. Vice President, 3, 2. He finally waves his hand in front of my face and goes, stop counting. If the Secret Service can't deal with it on the roof, everybody stand by for impact. I remember putting the hands on the console in front of me, realizing that, holy mackerel, the world's greatest superpower just said checkmate. We don't have a fighter aircraft over Washington, D.C. We're going to take a body blow here at the White House. There are hundreds of people still outside being pushed to the south and pushed to the north, and yet we don't have a fighter aircraft that can engage this guy. And just then, all the satellite radios blared to life. That's not a bogey. That's a medevac helicopter racing to save lives at the Pentagon. They came out of Fort Belvoir, just to the south. They heard there was lots of burn victims as a result of the impact of Flight 77 on the Pentagon. 6 doctors ran out of the Fort Belvoir Army Hospital, commandeered an air crew, and said, we got to get to the Pentagon to help out. This air crew, racing as fast as they can fly, got 5 miles outside of Washington, D.C., called for permission to enter the Washington, D.C. airspace, and there was nobody in Reagan Tower. They had evacuated as a result of the flyover of Flight 77. They did one turn and holding. They made an air crew decision, get me to the Pentagon. We got lives to save. And when they entered Washington, D.C. airspace, we were doing our very best to try to find the missile to kill them. We call it fog of war. It worked out for us that day that we didn't have a fighter over Baltimore that would have engaged them from 40 miles away as they were racing to save lives to the Pentagon that day. 10:14. Vice President Cheney turned to Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, who was standing next to him. He said, Norm, I've had enough. Shut it down. I don't mean ground stops in New York, Boston, and L.A. I mean every airplane on the ground, coast to coast. Do it now. First time in our history, we're going to land every airplane over the United States. Norman Mineta called the Herndon, Virginia Command Center of the FAA, Secretary of Transportation, executive order, land every plane in the United States, do it now. They immediately came back, said, sir, we're not manned to sequence 2,000 airliners simultaneously and to land them that rapidly. Just then, on all the the satellite radios, we heard, this is the North American Aero Defense Command. This is NORAD. The U.S. Air Force, hearing that the FAA couldn't handle that, immediately assumed airspace control over the United States. First time in our history, the U.S. Air Force is now in charge of the airspace, not just over the United States, but over Canada, but we're landing every airplane that's over the airspace, in the airspace of the United States. The FAA became a subordinate agency to the United States Air Force to help them sequence this traffic to get everybody on the ground as quickly and as safely as possible. First time in our history. I put up there, we had 2,000 aircraft still reported airborne, and you see that other term up there, NAOC, the National Airborne Ops Center, the plane that overflew the White House, the Doomsday plane, was now in position. If the president wants to get off Air Force One and climb onto this E-4B, these two 747s need to figure out where they want to go and make the switch. But NAOC is now in position to do that. 10:17, just a few minutes later, we got reports that there was an explosion on Capitol Hill and there was an explosion over at the State Department. Dr. Rice, now told by Vice President Cheney to figure it out. She calls over to Capitol Hill Police and they said, ma'am, that's an erroneous report. We're doing an orderly evacuation. No explosion here. Great. She calls over to the Department of State. They said, yes, ma'am, we've had an explosion. She's got her thumb up in the air to the Vice President. We got an event at the State Department. He's going, I need more information. What do you got? What do you know? And they quickly came back and said, ma'am, it wasn't a car bomb. Our backup generator exploded when we turned it on. Check your backup generators once in a while. Adding to the confusion of the day for sure, but we were grateful it wasn't a car bomb. It would have heightened this situation even more so than it was. 10:20. All of a sudden, Secret Service called down the bunker complex again. I pick up the phone. They go, Major, we got a credible source. Sarasota, Florida area. Angel is the next target. Angel is a Secret Service code word for President Bush on Air Force One. Every president has got a Secret Service code word. Ronald Reagan, Rawhide. President Bush, Angel. President Clinton, Player. They all had their own. You know what? Is he here? It wasn't Player. It could have been Player. No, it wasn't Player. I just wanted to see if you were listening. But they put Angel in the conversation. So I turned to Dr. Rice, said, ma'am, credible source, Sarasota, Florida area, Angel is the next target. She immediately grabs onto my huge bicep and asked me, she goes, by the way, who the hell is Angel? You would think the National Security Advisor knows the code words for this. I said, ma'am, that's the president on Air Force One. That's it. She's gone. No higher state of emergency. We got a legitimate threat against the President of the United States. They immediately call Colonel Mark Tillman, the Air Force One pilot, said, listen, I don't have many details for you, but we got a threat against the President. President Bush went to the nose of the aircraft. The White House press corps that travels with him was ordered back in their seats. Nobody's allowed to transmit. Nobody's allowed to receive. Air traffic control is no longer allowed to report the position of Air Force One. I'll tell you, a normal 747 carries 300 people. This one's designed to carry 70 people very high and very fast. Colonel Tillman pushed those 4 engines up to the firewall, pulled the nose of that airplane back. They went to 50,000 feet heading west at almost 700 miles an hour. If you're going to ram Air Force One, you better bring your daddy's F-16 because there's not a lot happening at 50,000 feet at that airspeed. They ended up scrambling 2 F-16s at Ellington Air National Guard Base, Houston, Texas. Told them to get to 50,000 feet. You'll figure it out when you get up there. And they put F-16s on the wings of Air Force One to safely escort him out to the west. A little bit of irony. That unit that was just charged with protecting Air Force One was the same unit President Bush served with when he was in the Texas Air National Guard. He literally has his squadron mates on either side of him escorting him safely to the west on 9/11. Just then, it was 10:24, when Vice President Cheney, now talking back to the Pentagon, said, you are authorized to shoot down all aircraft still pointing at Washington, D.C. If Johnny is flying his daddy's Cessna on the wrong side of the Potomac River, shoot him down. If somebody's trying to get into Manassas, Dulles, or Reagan, they hadn't figured out what's going on in the world, shoot them down. The Pentagon came back and said, Roger, copy all, sir. By the way, we got a Navy DDG, a guided missile destroyer off the coast of New York City, tracking 60 targets. 60 airliners told to land for the very last time at JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia Airport. Vice President Cheney said, great, I want a missile solution for every one of them. If somebody's not complying, I want them shot down sooner, not later. Vice President Cheney in charge. He was like the evil emperor at this point. He was taking our country back from terrorists. He was willing to do whatever it took to get America safe again. Just then, at 10:27, President Bush calls for a cabinet meeting in the sky. We call it an air threat conference. He's on Air Force One. He wants to talk to every available cabinet member. They all dial in on the satellite radios, and they're essentially going around the horn, telling the president what's happening and what they're doing in their area of responsibility. It came over to Donald Rumsfeld's turn. He's back inside the building. He goes, Mr. President, given the current situation, I recommend that we take our strategic nuclear forces from DEFCON 4 up to DEFCON 3. Defense Condition 4. Defense Condition 5 is peace. Defense Condition 1 is nuclear war. We're at DEFCON 4. He wants to move us up worldwide, DEFCON 3. President Bush said, you know, it's a great idea. Have them stand by for DEFCON 2. Dr. Rice, always the academic, the provost, grabs my arm. She goes, Major, we haven't been to DEFCON 2 since the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. I looked at her and I was like, I know. I didn't know. But I didn't want to be the only guy in the bunker complex that day that didn't know history. So I just went with it like everybody knew. Vice President Cheney interrupts her and says, Condi, make it happen. She reached across my console. She picked up that red phone, calling over to the National Military Command Center. Executive order of the President of the United States, move our strategic nuclear forces from DEFCON 4 up to DEFCON 3. Have them stand by, DEFCON 2. When you heard the Pentagon call NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, they buttoned up the mountain for the first time in history. And all of a sudden, you heard Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, talking to our 4-star generals and admirals, our combatant commanders around the world. We're listening in, and we hear, this is Central Command, Pacific Command, Atlantic Command, European Command, Southern Command, Joint Forces Command, Special Operations Command. This is NORAD. We are DEFCON 3, standing by DEFCON 2. Worldwide, DEFCON 3. When a DEFCON condition changes, highly classified stuff, I'm allowed to tell you this much. All branches of the military open up their playbooks and everybody moves. Bombers get loaded, Marines deploy, bases get hardened, recall rosters go out, ships out of port, submarines to launch depth. Everybody's got something to do when a DEFCON condition changes. It was the quickest way to get the U.S. military back to work worldwide, to put us on an offensive footing as the president decides who we're going to go to war with, get all our forces ready to go to war. That's why the decision was made. Just then, by the way, I put up here, notified the Russians in red, so you can see it. My phone rings again. I picked it up, Major Darling. And the upstairs White House Situation Room goes, Major, we have President Putin holding for the President of the United States. Will you take the call? And I'm thinking, no. Tell President Putin I'm here to do logistics. I don't even know if I could tell President Putin to hold on. I just covered the receiver. I yell out in the room, Mr. Vice President, sir, I got President Putin holding for the president. Sir, will you take the call? Well, the room goes silent. Cheney's shoulders slump over, but like the great leader he was, he goes, hey, Condi, you take the call. I wrote down in my notebook, leadership equals delegation. If you're top of the food chain and you don't want to do it, you give it away. And he did. He gave it away to Dr. Rice. So now she's sitting next to me talking to President Putin. I was like, I wonder how this is going to go down. Is she going to start speaking Russian? She was speaking English through the White House interpreter upstairs. She was non-evasive, plain language. Mr. President, thank you for your phone call today. Our president is in motion. We don't know the size and scope of the attack. We don't know if it's over. He's going to call you the first chance he gets. And oh, by the way, Mr. President, thank you for standing down your nuclear forces. And we were like, what does that mean? And I quickly learned that whenever we go to a higher state of readiness, part of the strategic nuclear alliance that the U.S. has with Russia is both their counterparts in the Department of Defense and Department of State call Russia to announce that we have just moved our nuclear forces to a higher state of readiness, so Russia can match our readiness condition. So if we go 3, they go 3, we go 2, they go 2, we go 1, they go 1. Fair if the missiles pass each other, not fair for those of us who want to live on this planet. They stayed at Russian DEFCON 4, while America went worldwide DEFCON 3. Just then, 10/28, saddest moment in history, lost the North Tower. Everybody's in disbelief. A lot of people screaming, yelling up at the TV sets when Vice President Cheney said, get me the president. The president, not an Air Force One, comes up on the net. He goes, Mr. President, sir, we just lost the North Tower. Like I told you before, this is my best guess. We have at least 40,000 dead Americans in the city of New York. It was a weird time because President Bush didn't say a word. We thought it was one of those times where the phones dropped off. The phone calls, we were having problems. You know, Air Force One is very advanced. It's, digital. Situation room is digital. We're in this Cold War bunker now. It's analog. We had some problems. It was pretty much a wind-up phone, down there at that time. And we were having some problems with phone calls dropping off the net. But President Bush was still there. It just took a while for him to answer, and he came back and said, hey, what's Mayor Giuliani saying? Has anyone spoken to the mayor? And Vice President Cheney said, no conversations with the mayor's office, sir. I have not spoken with Mayor Giuliani. He goes, Dick, what are the hospitals saying as far as dead and wounded? What kind of responses or reports are we seeing from the hospitals in New York City? He goes, sir, I got no reports from any hospitals up there. He goes, what about the Federal Emergency Management Agency? What about FEMA? What are they seeing? He goes, Mr. President, FEMA hasn't even left yet. An hour and 45 minutes after the attack on America began. Like I said, we're a powerful nation, but it takes a lot longer to divert aircraft into Andrews, get everybody across Washington, D.C., get all those planes loaded up, mounted up, flown to John F. Kennedy Airport, escorted into Manhattan Island. It takes a lot longer than an hour and 45 minutes. The president, the leader of the free world, had 315 million Americans counting on him, and we had no federal response that we could tell him about when the second tower came down in New York City. It was a very sad moment for him and for the rest of us in the world as we lost that North Tower. 10:45, as a result of DEFCON 3, we got all the federal buildings evacuated, the Senate leadership I told you about. The Speaker of the House was not where he needed to be. Dr. Rice came running over. She goes, Major, do you know where they're supposed to take Speaker of the House? Yes, ma'am, I do. I wasn't 100% sure. I just felt like I needed to figure it out. Well, the Marine Corps taught me if you're going to lie to somebody that senior, put some distance between you and them. Maybe it'll become OBE. They'll forget they even tasked you to find out. My training kicks in. I start walking away from Dr. Rice. We get to the other side of the bunker complex, and she's this close to my face going, where are we going, Major? And I said, I just really want to use this phone right here, ma'am. Went to the White House switchboard. I get hold of this Air Force full bird colonel. I say, hey, sir, it's Major Darling. I'm calling you from the PEOC. Did you drop off the Speaker of the House? He goes, Major, we're not having this phone call on an unsecure line. I go, roger that, sir. There are no more secure lines in Washington, D.C. Tap once for yes, twice for no. Did you drop the man off? He wouldn't budge. Dr. Rice is poking me in the chest. She wants an answer, and she wants it right now. And you know what? The colonel just wouldn't give in. And she goes, hang up on that moron. And I got to tell you, when you're a Marine major and you get permission to hang up on a full bird colonel, you take it. I was like, roger that. I slammed the phone down. All the loudspeakers blared to life. Speaker of the House arrives. Speaker of the House arrives. Everyone was thanking me as if I had anything to do with it. I took full credit for that. I was like, sure, SEAL Team 6, let me know. It's going to be over here. I got this. At 11 o'clock, we had at least 10 airliners not complying with their landing instructions. Let's think about this. You have a lot of pilots up there. You have 300 people sitting behind you. You don't know what's going on in the world. NORAD is in charge of the airspace, and you're not going to California. They ordered you down in Kansas. You're trying to call American, United, U.S. Air Base to say, hey, the U.S. military has ordered me down out of the sky. Do you guys know what's going on? Well, if they went past where NORAD wanted them to be, NORAD wrote them off as being under duress, not complying with their military landing instructions, and now we are scrambling fighter jets all over America to escort these 10 aircraft that weren't complying down onto the ground. And when they got on the ground, they crossed off their list. 11:48, this is Colin Powell. He was our Secretary of State at the time. He was wheels up coming back to America out of Lima, Peru. If we lose the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, they're going to turn to that senior cabinet member official. They want Colin Powell back home. That's why he was on my high priority grease board. That's why he's in the brief here. We were tracking his whereabouts, bringing him back to the United States. All of a sudden, we had 12:57. We had this guy, almost 1 o'clock. We got reports that we have a high-speed, low-level aircraft heading for the president's ranch in Crawford, Texas. Vice President Cheney, talking to the Pentagon, goes, do not let that aircraft reach Crawford, Texas. And they end up scrambling those two F-16s out of San Antonio, Kelly Air Force Base. You are weapons-free. You are cleared hot. You are, get there. Do what you need to do. So they went supersonic, 1,200 miles an hour, and when they got there, they didn't find a bogey or a bad guy. They found a crop duster. So I got to tell you, crop dusters, maybe you guys know this, they don't even have radios. This guy's, drinking the cognac, dropping the deep. He has no idea what's going on in the world when two F-16s went by him at 1,200 miles per hour. We were lucky his little aircraft didn't fold up like luggage. We made a joke in the bunker that day that when he landed, he sobered up, drove over to see the sheriff, and said, I just saw 2 UFOs. It must have been pretty horrific for him. 13:45, the president now wheels up out of Barksdale, Louisiana. He's on his way out to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, home of Strategic Command, great place for our president to be for the foreseeable future. Also, we got 1 minute later, we got reports that we had 2 carrier battle groups, 2 carrier strike groups at a port. 3 hours from DEFCON 3 to go, we got the USS George Washington, 5,000 Marines and sailors, 75 combat planes, fast attack submarine, supply ship, weapons ship at a port. They're in the Atlantic, they're steaming towards war, and we got word that the USS John F. Kennedy was also at a port in Jacksonville, Florida. Again, 2 armadas in the Atlantic waiting for follow-on instructions from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Air Force One arrives off at almost 3 o'clock. They quickly took him underground. As soon as he got down there, said, Mr. President, he has an air threat conference. We got a confirmed hostage situation on a U.S. Airways airliner just left Madrid, Spain, on its way to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Finally, the luxury of 3,000 miles of ocean. President then, talking to the Pentagon, authorizes the intercept if that plane reaches the air defense zone around the United States. The Navy accepts the mission. They're moving in position for the intercept, and that aircraft ended up turning around, going back to Madrid. It was not a confirmed hostage. It was a passenger having a heart attack. Information coming in so rapidly, no time to vet it out. Here's the president. He's got a 4-star on his right. He's underground. He's got Andy Card to his left, that White House communicator. He's talking to any world leader in the secure VTC. I'm sure he's talking to the White House, the CIA, the NSA, anybody the president wants to talk to. Something very significant happened here. They were trying to tell President Bush not to come back to Washington, D.C. He said, I want you to listen to me. Continuity of presidency is no longer in effect. I'll be wheels up in 15 minutes. I'm coming home. And when I get home, I want a second presidential daily brief. As many of you know, the CIA briefs the president every morning at 8 o'clock with worldwide threats. He had a brief in Sarasota, Florida that morning. Obviously inadequate. He wants another brief when he gets home. He wants to know where this Osama bin Laden is and what we're going to do about it by the time he gets back. So sure enough, everybody now, Dr. Rice is scrambling black Suburbans all over Washington, D.C. to all these intelligence agencies going, if you got information to the president, better make it back in here. President's coming home. Something else very significant happened. United Flight 93 that took off out of Newark down in a field in Shanksville was supposed to arrive in San Francisco. San Francisco is now full of United families and grief counselors and pilots and aircrew and our elite counterterrorism team, the FBI hostage rescue team. All 75 members were on the ground in San Francisco. They did a huge exercise out there. They can't get home. There's no way to get them home. It became a White House priority mission, get HRT back from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. When United found out about it, they went through their chain of command, ultimately into the White House. They requested permission to fly HRT from San Francisco to Washington. The Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Joe Hagan, said, Major, what does that do for you? I go, sir, you're freeing up a C-17. I have 8 other high-priority presidential missions I need to tend to. He goes, then it's approved. First time in history, United Airlines became Special Air Mission 8811, carrying HRT from San Francisco to Washington. I made a critical error. I reached up on my big grease board and I crossed off hostage rescue team so I can focus on the next mission. Anybody who's ever been in planning knows a mission is not over until it's over. I jumped the gun. It's going to come back to haunt me later that night. President's coming home. They're building the president's daily brief. Dr. Rice is going to meet him outside at the aircraft and bring him right into the PIOC. He just got briefed when he's down there. They just quickly briefed him on the president's daily brief. He knows it's Osama bin Laden. He's in Afghanistan. And they were creating courses of action for the president to make decisions. But when he entered the bunker complex, he sat down, and they literally started with Vice President Cheney, and they're going around the room. They're giving him a 30-second data dump. Finally, the president looks up and goes, FEMA, where are you? Joe Alba, Joe, where are you? I'm here, Mr. President. Get up to New York, bring a checkbook. I hear it's a mess up there. Transportation, where are you, Norm? Here, Mr. President. Norman Mineta. Norm, I want planes, trains, and automobiles up and operating by noon tomorrow. Figure it out. Let me know when you do. I want to see my national security team upstairs in 5 minutes. The rest of you, thanks for coming. President's out of his seat, out of the bunker, going upstairs. America's going to war. Everybody else had better catch up. President briefs the nation at 8:30 that night. We were attacked by a faceless coward, a non-conventional force, a terrorist organization, a radical ideology. This is not going to be something we can wipe out in a weekend. It's going to be a generational war. It's going to take a lot of resiliency and patience from the American public if we're going to deal with this type of ideological threat. Remember I told you about Special Air Mission 8811. I'm down the bunker complex. I'm working to get the rest of the cabinet home. One of the Secret Service agents hit the alarm. Sirens are spinning, horns are going off, guns are drawn. Secret Service agents are yelling, "The president is coming to the bunker. The president is coming to the bunker." Literally, they entered the residence. They scooped the president and first lady out of bed. He had barely enough time to grab Barney and Spot, the two terriers, and they're yelling, "Get away from the door." And I'm thinking, man, I hope I have nothing to do with this. And sure enough, it was the Secret Service hitting the alarm because Special Air Mission 8811 was being escorted by two F-15s from NORAD. I never cleared that mission with the Secret Service. All they saw on their scope, holy mackerel, 3 fast-moving bogies inbound. No time to sort it out. And they literally scooped the president and first lady out of bed to get them downstairs in the bunker complex. I realized it just might be my last day. I need to take a closer look at the artwork down here. Sure enough, the president comes to the door. He's in his pajamas, first lady in tow. He drops the 2 dogs. I got to tell you, First Lady Laura Bush, her hair was perfect. It does not move. She looks great 24/7. He was a disheveled mess. No loyalty in the bunker complex. They all go, "Mr. President, Mr. President." Darling, Airlift Operations, D-A-R-L. They were throwing me under the bus. Lack of coordination between Airlift Operations, Darling, and the Secret Service. So he goes, what are you saying to me? Those are all good guys? Yes, sir. HRT is back home. He goes, I can go back upstairs and go to bed? Yes, sir, you can go to bed. And he picks up the 2 dogs. He didn't say a word to me, but as he walks by, he stops and turns and looks at me like, you don't want to be the airlift ops guy that gets me pulled out of the rack again tonight. And I'm thinking, no, sir, I do not. President out the door, upstairs he goes. America's going to war. Soon after, we had a cadre of White House staffers that wanted to go up to Ground Zero about September 23rd. Let me tell you, way too soon. In the eyes of our first responders, it was not a recovery mission. It was a rescue mission in progress. They weren't ready to call it a recovery mission. Bucket by bucket, going through 13 stories of carnage, looking for somebody that was alive. They came off the pile to come address these White House staffers. And I'll never forget this moment. As professional as they were and as emotionally drained as they were, they told us, listen, there's 13 stories of carnage. There are no desks, escalators, elevators, computers. There's nothing you can go out there and pick up and go, look, it used to be something I recognize. At 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, with all that jet fuel and friction coming down, everything is eviscerated into ash, glass, and twisted steel. That's it. Place is still too hot to touch. Blocks away from Ground Zero were water pipes, sewage pipes sticking straight through the road. All that reverse plumbing has to go somewhere. So try to imagine 750,000 people running for their very lives, and underneath the street, the sewage pipes are buckling, coming straight through the road. They must have truly thought they were witnessing Armageddon up there. More of the same. I put this picture up there so you could see the hole in the ground, shocked people, first responders, all taking it all in. This is a quote from President George W. Bush, September 20th, in front of a joint session of Congress. This quote became my why. This is why I've been telling this story, and I'll continue to tell this story to anybody who will listen. It's that important to me. This is what President Bush said that day. I will not forget the wound to our country and those who inflicted it. I will not yield. I will not rest. I will not relent in waging this struggle for freedom and the security of the American people. President George W. Bush. Our number one ally in the world, Great Britain, Tony Blair, said this soon after. They have no moral inhibition on the slaughter of the innocent. If they could have murdered not 7,000, but 70,000, does anyone doubt they would have done so and rejoiced in it? There is no compromise possible with such people. No meeting of the minds, no point of understanding with such terror, just a choice, defeat it or be defeated by it, and defeat it we must. Tony Blair. So here we are, 18 years later. We've been at war ever since. And I got to tell you, like I said in the beginning of this presentation, I had the pleasure of traveling around, meeting real America outside the Washington, D.C. Beltway to kind of gauge the situation to see how we're doing. And I want to tell you something. I inject a little humor where I think it's appropriate, but I never lose sight that on 9/11 we lost nearly 3,000 innocent Americans, either working at the towers, serving this country in the Pentagon, fighting for their very lives on board United Flight 93. Pure, undeserving victims of evil and hatred whose only mission that day was to kill as many Americans as possible. But as you all know, they got it wrong. Instead of destroying us, they unified us. Instead of instilling fear in us, thousands flocked to recruiting stations around our nation. Instead of overwhelming us in despair, all they did was unleash one of America's greatest attributes, and that's called resilience. It's our resilience that got us through the American Revolution, Civil War, 2 world wars, Vietnam. It's our resilience that enables us to overcome earthquakes, floods, epidemics, fires, pandemics. It's our resilience that empowers ordinary Americans to do extraordinary things to save each other. The resilience of the people in this room, the community outreach, the service before self that you all promote as part of this Rotary Club builds upon that resilience that we need should a terrorist attack ever come to our country again. I believe it'll be people in this room who go above and beyond to save somebody they may or may not know. That's the true strength of America. So, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I agree. Thank you. So before I run out of here today, I just came to say on a personal level, thank you all. Thank you all for your patriotism, your dedication to this community, this state, and ultimately our national security. What you do every day to support each other, to support your veterans, to give folks jobs, to do outreach, to give folks scholarships, to keep this community safe and strong matters. This community is part of the overall cog in the wheel of our great nation. Never underestimate the enormous impact this club has on the lives of so many. Thank you all. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.